All right, hello, and it's silverkyle, and today I am going to be reviewing Book 1 of Robert Jordan's The Wheel of Time series, The Eye of the World. Now, if The Lord of the Rings piqued my curiosity for the fantasy genre, I would have to say that The Wheel of Time solidified my love for this genre. I absolutely love The Wheel of Time and The Eye of the World. This is such a good introduction to a massive world that I think in the fantasy genre is only second in terms of world building to Tolkien. That's how well Robert Jordan did, and eventually Brandon Sanderson did with this series for the depth, the lore, just everything in this entire series is fantastic. And I've only read up to book 8, so I haven't even finished the series, and this is arguably my favorite series of all time, and I've only read up to book 8. This is wild. So, having said that, we are going to be doing a non-spoiler review for The Eye of the World. Then we're going to go into some spoilers near the end, while I make it very apparent that we're doing that. But I'm still only going to be sticking to book 1. I don't want to go further. If there's a character that I like from one of the later books, I won't be mentioning that. I'm just going to be focusing on this specific book. So, what we have in The Eye of the World is humble beginnings, where a lot of people say that this is, very much like reminiscent of the Fellowship of the Ring. And while I do see a lot of similarities, there are so many different changes that go on throughout this entire series that really it has its own name, and it is not a Lord of the Rings ripoff. There are some similarities early on, but that quickly changes afterwards with all the character interactions, all the different characters, this different world, all the different magic systems. It is just, I think that obviously Lord of the Rings influenced Jordan and took the very beginnings, kind of said, okay, let's kind of have a similar beginning and then kind of just go and create our own different thing. And that's really what this feels like. So we have humble beginnings in a small town where we are introduced not to really teenagers, I would say young adults that are still very innocent to the world and wholesome. They have never really gone further than this small town, and they don't really know about what's going on in the outside world. Every once in a while, every year, they'll maybe get some merchants that come through and explain what of the world news or things that are going on, and they can really hype it up, and people are like wowed. But they're all essentially farmers kind of living in their own little bubble. And things happen where now they have to leave their small town. And they go through, that's when things really start to change. Once they leave, obviously, there's a lot of walking here and traveling, but I feel that there is so many moments when you're traveling, when you're tired, when you're exhausted, and you're going to these different areas, and when they're seeing the world, Robert Jordan does a great job of explaining how excited they are to see this, or if they're depending on their mood, they might go into a town feeling absolutely like crap and negative, but they'll still be in awe of how fantastic these places are because they've never seen anything like it. And I really like that because you are then seeing everything from their point of view, and it just really works well for storytelling. And every little area that we go through in the Eye of the World does feel unique and different on its own. Starting with the 2 rivers at the beginning to, I don't want to really say where else they go, but everywhere else afterwards does have its own unique flavor, its own unique cast of characters. And that is one, I would say it's a double-edged sword. The amount of characters that are in the Wheel of Time is either a positive or a negative. To me, it's only a positive. And if you're intimidated by the amount of characters that are in here, there is I should have the companion book. I think that most books that you do get, the one that I was reading, I have the hardcover here, but I was reading the massive trade paperback because to me that's just a little bit easier. A lot of times they will have, and they might have it in this. I don't know. I don't think that they do. They usually have a glossary at the very back of all the different characters. I know that the small mass market paperbacks definitely had that. That's how I first started it. But they'll kind of give you a synopsis of everybody that's there and what their purpose is. But you can really also just follow the main characters. And they do a great job within the first few chapters. You know who are going to be the main characters for this story. And so if you just don't want to focus on everybody else, like every time that they go to a different inn, so that every town that they're in, there's an innkeeper, and you kind of get a different kind of personality, how they look, that's very different, very detailed a lot of times. And they're all have their own characteristic traits, and you can decide to keep in mind which innkeepers that you potentially liked, or you can just say that's an innkeeper at this specific place. Moving on, let's just follow the story. You can do it both ways, and that's what's really nice about this, that if you are intimidated, just don't worry about that. Focus on the main characters. There's a lot of little side things, but you can just really focus on what's happening with all the main characters. And what happens throughout this is that it does change a little bit with the point of views. There's one specific character that it definitely sticks with quite a bit more, but it does alternate a little bit, and people kind of end up going in separate areas. And that allows you to really get an idea of all these different characters because they're separated, and you're able to see the different interactions, and it allows them to come to the every character to get a little bit of time to shine. So you're not just having this massive party where in this, I just want to show, because I love this art. To me, this is the Wheel of Time. Not everybody's a fan of this, and I don't understand it. Well, I understand. I do, because not everybody likes everything. But this, to me, is absolutely beautiful. I always thought there was more characters here. There's only 5. There's more than that in the party, but there you go. So I like that. When you have a big party, it's really hard to kind of get these little conversations that you're going to have and allow everybody to have their moment. When they separate them, you then get those little parts where now you're just going to have a conversation between 2 characters and that's it, or 3 characters, whatever it may be. And I enjoy that. It's also another way that they can introduce different characters throughout. And this is very much a good versus evil storyline. There is basically the Dark One that is kind of captured has been basically in prison since the beginning, and the creators put him there. And they always reference it constantly throughout this entire novel. And it's funny how you see where on a small town, they kind of just say, don't say his name. And that must be because the Dark One's doing all this stuff. And they all don't believe, they kind of believe in superstition, but they don't at the same time. They don't believe necessarily in all the evil monsters that might exist in this world. And then the further you go along and into the bigger cities where they have potentially seen a lot more than what farmers would in a very small village that is kind of off the beaten path. So there's no real reason for any of the big merchants or armies to pass by, or even travelers. Like, it's really weird when they do notice a traveler. That, to me, is one of the best chapters. At chapter 1, there's a prologue. Prologue's okay. I almost feel like you could skip the prologue. Like, when I was a kid or a teenager, I was like, what the heck is going on? And then I got to chapter 1, and I was like, oh, this is awesome. This is exactly what I want. The prologue, there's a lot being thrown out, and it makes sense later on. But I feel like you could almost skip it and just move on, and you'll be fine. You'll eventually catch on to what's happening here. But that chapter 1 is so good. It gives me the creepy vibes so much. Like, when I'm reading that, I've read it to like girlfriends before, and I specifically went on and said, read this specific part, and they would be freaking out usually. I would try to add a little more tension probably to these specific moments, but it's good stuff. And I feel like throughout this book, you kind of get all these things because you're starting from the humble beginnings. When they deal with anything that is way bigger than they've ever dealt with before, that they thought were just superstitions and stories and myths and that kind of thing, you get that sense of danger. And you need that in stories. And Jordan does a great job with that. I absolutely love The Eye of the World. And it has a good enough ending that you obviously want to keep going, but it's satisfying at the end. It's not like a cliffhanger ending or anything like that. I do like that they kind of, okay, this is an okay ending enough that if you don't want to continue, you don't necessarily have to. I strongly suggest you do, but They did a good job with that. So I'm going to give this book a 4.5 out of 5 stars. I am going to give it 5 stars on Goodreads because to me it is closer to the 5 stars than it is the 4. There is a few areas where it didn't exactly jive with me, and it had to do more so with some of the characters and some of the decisions that were made. So let's dive into now spoilers. So the rest of this will have spoilers just for The Eye of the World. Rand is the Dragon Reborn. It's at the end, we find out that he is now, as the wheel spins, there is always going to be somebody else that comes up as the Dragon Reborn. And Rand is now picked, and nobody, it's so funny because throughout this book, people say that the Dragon Reborn is going to be able to come back and defeat the evil, the Dark One. But then so many people also think that the Dragon Reborn is just going to cause madness and chaos and nothing good. And he's also in line with the Dark One. I like that there are so many different points of views, that everything is kind of, who to believe. And throughout this, you also get Moiraine as the Aes Sedai, whatever they're called. They don't trust her. And you can get a clear vibe by the end of this that she's really there to help them. But she is an Aes Sedai, whatever it is. And I also feel like I get that. I believe that she's here for the right reasons, right? I do believe that she's a good character, but she does feel a little bit that she wants it her way, and she doesn't explain enough. And I think that's the biggest part, is that a lot of times, if she would just take a little bit of a second here or there to kind of explain what's going on, a lot of the mistakes that some of the characters make could have been stopped. Granted, that's storytelling, so I get it at the same time. What I don't like necessarily, and one of the only reasons why this isn't like a full 5 star, is there are so many dream sequences. And while dreams are very important in the Eye of the World, because it's not like they're just seeing, they're not just dreaming about something that could happen, or premonitions or anything like that, although there is a lot of foreshadowing in this book. What I don't care about when they're in the dream sequence and Balsamon, or whatever his name is constantly there and saying the same thing over and over again, and nothing changes. He's there. He's like, hey, you're going to join me either now or after you're dead. It's your choice. Don't trust the Aes Sedai. That's it. And then we get another dream, and it's the same thing. Maybe he injures them and they can see that they're actually hurt in the real world, which is interesting, but that's about it. That's all you need. And then it keeps happening over and over again. And I'm like, what's the point in reading this dream sequence? It's not going to give me anything extra. You read it and you're like, yeah, that didn't add any value to the story whatsoever at all. I hate dream sequences to begin with, because I think they're the dumbest thing. I always want to be in the present, in the real world. That's usually where I care about things. But dreams, at least, if you get injured, there are certain things that can actually happen in dreams in this world. So I'll give them that. But every time that Balsamon shows up, and every time that he showed up, he seemed like the only character that wasn't intimidating. I felt that the Myrddraal, or however you pronounce those, the Fades, they are way creepier. Even like the monsters that are like the regular, I want to say Hork-Bajir, but that's Animorphs. What are they called? The Trollocs. My goodness. The Trollocs are scarier by far than Balsamon. Balsamon shows up and I'm just like, you're claiming to be the Dark One, and you're just threatening them and saying that you're eventually going to be part of my army, whether right now by your choice, or even if you're dead, you'll still be mine. And he just says that over and over. It's just so redundant. Not the best part of storytelling. In terms of characters that I don't necessarily like, I would probably say that Egwene is a little bit annoying at times. Moiraine can get like that too, but I do feel that I'm more so on her side. I think Lan is great, and I feel so many people are going to enjoy Lan, but because he just seems like a badass character. And I mean, when you look at this, and that's him, the guy's freaking awesome. But he's not really meant to be a main character, it feels like. He's there as a side character, as a supporter, but just because of how advanced he is and how he's the main scout and nobody knows what the heck he's doing, because he'll just go off and then he'll come back and be like, nah, there's a bunch of people following us. I don't know if I can take them. I don't think we can take them. He's just so knowledgeable that he's essentially Aragorn, kind of like Aragorn, but without any major lines. He is a much more silent, excellent soldier, perfect bodyguard is what Lan is. And so I think that we just like that kind of character for how badass he is, but he doesn't really say much, which is kind of unfortunate. In terms of characters that I love, I think Tom is awesome in this. Perrin is probably my favorite right now in book 1. Rand I like. Rand will once in a while just be a little bit too stubborn and do a few things that are kind of a little bit foolish in my opinion, but overall he's still a really good character. And then Matt just is this little guy that is hilarious. I absolutely love Matt. He is just making jokes, and then eventually he gets the dagger, and him getting the dagger makes so much sense because he's innocent, he's wholesome, but he's kind of like a shit disturber, and that's essentially what he does. This don't accept any treasures from this person as long as they don't provide it to you. Don't take anything that they give you. He's like, well, he didn't give it to me. It was on the ground, so I just grabbed it up, and now we've got the whole dagger thing. Dagger's pretty freaking wicked too. But so, and then he eventually starts to go crazy. Loyal is this wholesome character that's reading books that people believe is a Trolloc, and he's like, well, I'm just gonna stick around with you guys because you're Taviern, so I'm drawn to you. Taviern, that's another thing too. Taviern is such. A lot of times you read any story, not necessarily in fantasy, but it very much happens in fantasy, where things change so much. And you're like, what are the chances of this happening? That doesn't make any sense, how everything kind of set up for them. But in the Wheel of Time, with Taviern, eventually there's 3 characters, Rand, Perrin, and Matt, that are Taviern. So Rand is the Dragon Reborn. Perrin can talk to wolves in real life and in his dreams. Matt, we don't know yet. He talks in a different language. He can talk in a different language that he just shouts when he kind of goes into battle. And they're all Taviern, which means that they can change the pattern of the wheel, which is like time and what's going on in the world, just because of how powerful they are. And when they're together, they can really change. If something was supposed to happen in the wheel, they're able to change it or make sure that it happens. It makes sense. So when crazy things start happening to any of these characters, if one of the Taviern, one of those 3 is there, you're like, oh, well, that would be why all of a sudden this is happening. Or, oh, what are the chances of that? Well, Taviern was there, so it makes sense. I like that Jordan included that as an explanation for why these things happen. Very good storytelling to explain, and you're then allowed to get away with a lot of things. And he doesn't get away with anything crazy. It all just makes sense. And I did very much like that. So yeah, Tom, probably my Perrin for probably book 1 is my favorite. Then Rand, then Matt, then Tom. Moraine, probably. Lan, Nynaeve. Loyal, Fadden Payne, the Innkeepers, Egwene. I don't care about Egwene. She's just annoying. Elaine is, while she's not necessarily, she doesn't get a lot of time to shine in this book here. I like that she sticks up for Rand. I know that's so, a hopeless romantic or something like that. Like, it's not necessarily a great love scene, but for me, for whatever reason, it works. I think a lot of this has to tie with when I was reading this at like 15, and to me that was just like, oh yeah, he meets up with a princess. That's awesome. I don't care about romance books at all, but every once in a while when there's something like this that for some reason I gravitate towards, it really worked for me. I was okay with this little love story that was kind of potentially developing, even though that Rand and Egwene are supposed to be potentially getting together at some point in time, because it seems as though they've already promised themselves. So although you can clearly see that things are not necessarily working, and it's alluded that Egwene is not going to be for Rand. This is mentioned to him by essentially a prophet in Min. She's an interesting little character too. Rand is terrified of her, and that's funny. So yeah, I'm having a blast. I'm loving this. I cannot wait to read The Great Hunt, which is next month. Pretty much in 2 weeks. 2 weeks I'm starting it. And if I can finish everything that I wanted to read in January, I might be able to start at the end of January. So that's even more exciting. So let me know in the comments below if you've ever read The Wheel of Time, The Eye of the World, what you think specifically about this book. And yeah, thank you all for watching. You have been bearded in. Beardage.